Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Rise and Fall of Nations, the Quranic Perspective, the word of 2024 and what we need to do. When we say what we need to do, that means in the light of the Quran, the students of the Quran, as we are in Tolu Islam, what should we do? These are the references. There are excerpts taken from Islam, a challenge to religion, and these are not referenced. So wherever there is no reference at the bottom of the slide, it means it is from Islam, a challenge to religion. And wherever these are taken from what is Islam, there will be a reference at the bottom of the slide. This is our contact in case there is any query or question regarding this presentation or any of our previous presentations. An overview of today's presentation. Everything in the universe follows the laws of Allah, and this includes the physical laws of nature and the permanent values relating to the development of the human self. The law of requital holds the key to understanding the functioning of any system in the world. The permanent values, whether obeyed or not, affect the human psyche at an individual level, and since nations are the aggregation of individuals, hence the rise and fall of nations is directly proportional to the values followed by each nation. So whatever we are discussing today, we should keep in mind that it is the human psyche which is operating behind every cause and every effect in the world. So as students of the Quran, we should always look at the people who are triggering these events, who are contributing to various events in the world. This means that when these permanent values are not obeyed, then the world is managed according to relative values, which lead to chaos and bloodshed. And the Quran refers to this state of affairs in the human world. So Quran does point to these facts in the world that if you are not following the permanent values, that this is the kind of world you will get. The effects of human evil actions take longer to manifest. Thus, those in power think they can get away without any accountability. Very important point for us as students of the Quran, that if there is no accountability in any system, whether we are living as a family together, or in a school, or in a university, or for that matter, in any institution, absence of accountability means injustice and chaos. The word of 2024 is the sum total of those causes and their effects which these nations have pursued in the last few centuries. If the guidance of the Quran is followed, then this chaos and bloodshed will vanish, and peace and tranquility will reign instead. Now, what I've done over here is that before the start of the presentation, I've drawn a simple schematic to start the presentation. This represents mankind over here. And this is the path we are following 2024 as a collective humanity. The word of 2024 is created by human intellect and unbridled desires alone, that is non-Quranic minds. When I say non-Quranic minds, it means they are not using the Quran as a whole as guidance, not picking and choosing as it happens in Muslim world, that what suits them, they try to follow it at an individual level, but they do not follow it as a system. The cause for whatever is taking place in the world can be linked to human choices and decision-making, which lead to imbalances, conflicts, and chaos. It is a world which goes through cycles of rise and fall based on trial and error phenomena. Because there is no consistency in such a system, people keep making mistakes and they rise to a certain extent, then they fall, sometimes very quickly, sometimes over a period of time, depending what kind of conflicts are taking place in that era. This world assumes that human life ends with physical death and that there is no higher purpose to human existence. And this is the basic cause of our problems, that human beings who are controlling the world think that the life will end with death and there is no higher purpose to human existence. Brain dead, we are dead, and that's the end of it. Hence, there is no accountability and there is no continuation of life beyond physical death. And those out of humanity who decide to take a different path, that is the path of Wahi or of the Quran, those among mankind who think hard about an alternative to man-made systems and seek a higher purpose in life despite being the beneficiaries of the unjust system. When they come to the Quran, they witness the outline of a system based on the permanent values, which is called Deen. It's not easy. We have to go through it and strip it apart, all these verses in the Quran. And this is what Allama Pervez did. And that is why his books are extremely useful in terms of finding about the outline of the system of Deen. After having accepted Iman, they begin to explore the establishment of Deen as a system and gradually find the answers to their questions. This converts the unseen into the seen. That is, what was ghaib becomes seen as shahada for them. A change in psyche leads to a change in the outer world. And we can see that when we make an effort, first we think, then we decide, and when we make an effort, our world changes and we impact our outer world. And the Quran says, Inna Allaha la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah does not change the state of a nation until they change what is in their selves, that is, what is within their psyche. And over here, Allah means His laws. So we have to understand the laws which are within the permanent values of the Quran, and these relate to human self and its development. Now going to the next slide, setting the scene for the need to study this topic. The Quran has repeatedly directed man's attention to the phenomena of nature and the events of history and exhorted him to ponder on them. These two fields, so distinct from each other, are fundamentally alike as both reflect the same divine purpose. The working of laws is discernible in both. That is the outer world, that is the world of nature, or our own human world, both follows laws. And when we go against the laws, of course, in the world of nature, we can't go against the laws, but within the human world, we can go against the laws. But we have seen that we are also affecting the environment in the world. Today, the processes that govern the entering and passing out of existence of living organisms seem fairly clear-cut. But when we move from an individual level to a group existence, the picture becomes a little hazy. And that is where human beings go wrong. They think it is at random. Sometimes the law of requital works, sometimes this cause and effect works, sometimes it doesn't, because they are not thinking through the whole problem. Nevertheless, creditable data has been compiled on the rules that govern the emergence and disintegration of human groups. The philosophy of history has tried to broaden the spectrum and to identify the laws that govern the rise and fall of nations. It has been a laudable attempt, but it has so far failed to give an intelligible account of the course of human history. None of the concepts put forward has held the field for long. The result is that history still appears to be a disorderly succession of fortuitous events. The Quran invites a look into history from a fresh angle which deserves attention. Next slide is everything in the universe follows the laws of Allah. According to the Quran, the divine purpose is at work in human affairs as it is in nature, the inanimate world, but with a difference. In nature, the divine purpose is progressively accomplished through laws from which there is no escape. We may call them the divine will. The material is passive and can be molded into any form concordant with the purpose of Allah. In history, on the other hand, the purpose is to be worked out through the willing and active cooperation of free finite things. The divine will, by a self-imposed restraint, permits them to act and choose for themselves. And that is the beauty of human creation, that Allah has given man full freedom for a finite physical life, so that we can create whatever kind of world we want on this planet Earth. The human beings who play their part on the stage of history have sometimes lived and acted in harmony with Allah's purpose and sometimes against it. In the former case, they have prospered, progressed, and taken their rightful place in the vanguard of civilization. In the latter case, they have fallen behind other people, have decayed, and ultimately have been supplanted by others. In this process, a causal relationship is indicated. Each way of life produces its own consequences. The set of regulations which governs these results is the law of requital. As you sow, so shall you reap. And it's quite interesting. This, what you sow, so shall you reap, is also given in the Bible. And I'm sure it is mentioned in other religious books as well. But somehow human beings do not concentrate on this fact and as a result suffer. This law is as relentless and inexorable in its working as any other law of nature. The Quran has repeatedly affirmed this law, and drawing upon human history has provided copious illustrations of its working. A nation which adopts a way of life that accords with the moral order of the universe achieves success in every field of activity. It wins both wisdom and material prosperity. And in the present world as well, we have seen that some of the Western nations have prospered and technologically are very advanced. But in terms of dealing with other nations, these gradually become unjust and as a result create imbalance in the world. And that imbalance then comes back to their own land as well. Because the imbalance which exists within their own psyche ultimately is going to affect their own society as well. A nation whose way of life is opposed to this order inevitably decays and disintegrates. Studying history through the Quranic lens empowers us. History is a record of the rise and fall of nations. It tells us about the nations that flourished in the past, their way of life, the goals they pursued, the values around which their culture was organized, their actions, and the consequences of those actions. History viewed as an assessment of the working of values can help us to solve our problems. This assessment will give us power, the power of prediction and control in the sphere of collective affairs. And this is a very powerful statement in this sentence. That's why I have highlighted it, that we become empowered through the law of requital if we follow it even in our individual life, because we know about the trend of the events which are taking place right before our eyes and where these are leading individuals as well as nations. We can avoid pitfalls, very important point. If we find ourselves following a course that has brought nations to a calamitous end, we can check ourselves in time, retrace our steps back to the crossroad and choose a better path, if not the right one. Sometimes if we look at it as students of the Quran, we know what choices we can make in our life, because at every crossroad of our life, we have choices before us, that whichever path we choose, then we will live with the consequences of following that path. But surprisingly, many people in the world do not pay any attention to this aspect. Even in today's world, there are discussions whether man possesses choice or not. We can thus have not only a guiding light to judge our own way of life, our thinking and our actions, but also an insight into the future of other nations from the ideals pursued by them. In short, if we wish to reap the best out of life, then there is no escape from a study of history relating to the conduct of earlier peoples and the fate that befell them. Wealth, power, numbers, nothing could save them when they ran afoul of the higher values. History has judged them as it will in time judge us. The prognosis is within our grasp. And the Quran says, verily we have sent down for you revelations that make plain and the example of those who passed away before you, an admonition unto those who wish to be secured from the pitfalls in the way of life. And this verse I've quoted over here and highlighted, وَمَوْعِظَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And we know that the Quran is for muttaqeen. That means those who wish to become muttaqeen, who want to avoid the pitfalls of life and get onto Sirat al-Mustaqim to get the best of this life as well as the life in the hereafter. Next slide is titled Modus Operandi of the Quranic Technique of Analysis. The method of the Quran is first to state the laws that govern the fate of nations. Important point, when we are studying the Quran, we should keep that in mind, that what law, what value, what principle, what precept the Quran is stating over here. And then to cite instances from history to illustrate the working of those laws. The purpose of the Quran is not to record past events in all their details, but to give sufficient reference to make its own point and leave out the rest. That is why Quran doesn't go into nitty-gritty details the way these are noted in the Bible. It is not a storytelling book. It is a book which deals with the issues directly and then illustrates them through examples. Thus, the Quran promotes such a deep insight into the nature of the life process that it inspires unquestioning faith in its pronouncement when it says, "Have they not traveled in the land to see the nature of the consequence for those before them? They were more numerous than these, and mightier in power and in the traces, which they have left behind them in the earth. But all that they used to earn availed them not, and when their messengers brought them clear proofs of the consequences of their doings, they exulted in the knowledge they themselves possessed, and that which they were wont to mock befell them." And that is an important point. Even as individuals, we should keep in mind that our stay in this world is finite. Hence, we should try to get best out of the time which is left for us. And Quran helps us to get the best out of our life by asking us to become muttaqeen. These nations enjoyed many advantages. They possessed power, wealth, technical knowledge, and a rich material culture. In prosperity, they had multiplied and spread over the earth. But when they chose to defy the moral order of the universe, all their efforts to ward off the blow of fate were of no avail. They fell into decay and dwindled away. And we know human history that how many nations, they rose to fame and then they declined, and today we don't hear much about them. And same is taking place right in front of us, that the world is becoming multipolar, and one side of the world is in steep decline. There are defined limits of evil doing, which when crossed, then there is no respite. They could not plead ignorance, as they had been warned time and again by Anbiya, and Anbiya over here means the messengers of Allah at that time, and in today's terms means that all those scholarly people, the intellectuals, they are also warning the existing nations that your path is wrong from among themselves. This is something, if we pay attention to, we will see that human beings who are good, who realize that the path taken by others is not right, they do tell them, they do warn them and tell them, and there are books and books written on that. And if we go to YouTube, the alternative media is providing warning to everyone in the world. These Anbiya had admonished them to recognize their mistakes and mend their ways. They, however, chose to ignore the warnings and persisted in treading a dangerous path. And that is where we have to concentrate, that if somebody warns me and I take that warning seriously, and as a result take precautionary measures and do not repeat those mistakes which I have done and for which the warning has been provided, but others persist on that. And that is where we have to study the psyche of those who make mistakes repeatedly and deep down think that they are not accountable, or their own desires are so great, so intense, that they do not wish to give up those desires. Vanity and pride ruled their hearts, and elated by temporary successes, they failed to foresee the long-term results of their actions. They failed to foresee because they did not wish to see. At last, they reached the limit that the laws of Allah have set to everything. When they crossed it, their fate was sealed. They had reached the point of no return. Remorse and repentance could not save them thereafter. And that is an important point, that how to figure out that their time of respite is coming to an end. And one of the ways of looking at that is that how many problems they are creating in all directions, that is within the country itself and what they are doing to the countries outside in the world. And that is a good indicator of where they stand in terms of their final demise. When they had crossed the limit, their iman could not avail them when they saw their doom. This is Allah's law, which has ever taken course in regard to his servants, that is mankind, and they were the ungodly lost. And over here, I have highlighted some of the points, particularly Sunnat Allah, that is the way Allah deals with them, the habit of Allah. A prominent aspect of the eternal, the unalterable law is that there are limits within which possibilities of change and recovery are available. For example, if somebody is terminally ill with cancer, then there is no further respite for that. and death is the fate of such an individual. Same goes for the nations. When they have gone against the permanent values, whether they knew about these permanent values or not, or they ignored these permanent values, and depending on how many permanent values they contravened, then their demise will hasten and it will be accelerated. Beyond those limits, nothing avails, and all attempts to save oneself run into sands. The law at work is fundamental value. The basic attitude that the law demands in human relationship is respect for the dignity of man. Extremely important. Whichever system does not respect and gives due dignity to every man in the land, that system is bound to collapse at some future time. For human personality, which every individual possesses equally and which has intrinsic value, it is not a mechanical thing. That human being, each human being, by virtue of possessing choice and intent, is authorized respect and dignity right at a fundamental level. Even if he or she commits a crime, he or she can be punished for the crime, but his or her respect and dignity cannot be compromised, cannot be gone against by anyone. And that is an important point as students of the Quran we need to keep in mind. A disregard of this value manifests itself in the exploitation of other human beings, either by damage to their person or to their possessions. And this is part of it. The exploiting nations are ruined. There are verses of the Quran over here from Surah Al-Anbiya. How many a community that dealt unjustly have we shattered and raised up after them another community. And when they saw the consequences of their doings in the shape of their doom, they tried to run away from it. Obviously, there is a long time gap between the two aspects. But it was said unto them, run not away, but return to that wherein you delighted, and to your dwellings, that you may be questioned. That is, we have to remain fully conscious of what we are doing, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. If we do not, then we are bound to meet a terrible end. As to whence you had obtained so much wealth and the way in which you had dealt with others, they confessed thereupon and said, lo, we were wrongdoers. And I have highlighted this point because this point we should keep in mind that we have to observe what is going on in the world. And this stage is about to reach where the powerful nations who have destroyed a big part of the world and destroyed the lives of millions, they are going to say themselves that we were wrong. And when they will say that, when the trouble will reach them. And this their crying ceased not till we made them reaped corn extinct. So in a way, this verse gives us a lot of optimism that things are changing fast in the world. The consequences may take their time, but are inevitable. The universe was not meant to be without a moral order, and the Quran says, we created not the heavens and the earth and all that is between them in support. And people who think that it is all in support and entertainment, they are sadly mistaken. The universe, including planet Earth, is created to function under the laws of Allah. They have been created so that our law of requital may be set in operation. And we have gone through this verse previously as well, that Allah has created heaven and earth as bil haq. And bil haq means for constructive results, so that every individual as part of humanity is held responsible for whatever they do. And holding responsible over here means that the word at any point in time is the sum total of deeds of everyone in that word. Wahum la yuzlamun, and none of them is treated unjustly. And we know that whatever we do, it leaves an imprint on our inner self. When a people choose to take a life in defiance of the moral order, there is actually no time lag between the action and its decaying result on their life process. But it may take some time for the effect to be perceptible and to manifest itself in social and economic maladies. Anyone stopping at the maladies in his analysis of the causes of a nation's fall would only be reaching the obvious symptoms, but not the root cause. And the root cause, as I said earlier, is their psyche. They think they can get away with whatever they are doing. If they are indulged in, for example, drugs, alcohol, and creating wars and chaos everywhere, then they might think they can get away, but it is simply impossible to get away with the effects of their wrongdoings. The ungodly way of life. The symptoms can be suppressed without curing the real disease. This would be inviting eruption of the disease in other and more dangerous forms. The Quran, taking a comprehensive view of life, calls for a radical cure, that is, a change of heart and a new orientation. That is, start making different choices. And that is where that is what the Quran calls Sirat-e-Mustaqim, that in whatever state we find the word, what we do is we study it and then take the right path. When this change is brought about, the symptoms start disappearing. The only cure for social ills is a return to the path of righteousness and rectitude. And it is very difficult. People who are following the wrong path, at times it becomes impossible for them. Even people warn them to change the course because their whole psyche becomes evil. The Quran designates the law of requital as the Sunnah of Allah, the uniform way in which He deals with the world in its physical and moral aspects. Sunnah implies order, uniformity, and consistency. It is the expression of Allah's rationally directed will. Explaining the habit of Allah. This has been the course followed by Allah with regard to those who passed away before. The bidding of Allah is a decree, measured according to a definite pattern called the divine laws. This law or habit of Allah knows no change. It will operate in the future as it has operated in the past. And this is a great reassurance to the students of the Quran or people who are making an effort to become muttaqeen in order to establish the system of deen, that Allah's laws don't change. This is the course called habit of Allah with regard to those who passed away before, and never shall you find a change in the course of Allah. And the problem we face in the world is that very few have come to the Quran. And those who have come to the Quran, many of them are not looking at the system of deen as an alternative to man-made system. And in Tolu Islam, we know we are focused on the system of deen. And when we look at the man-made system and compare it with the system of deen, then we clearly understand that it is the system of deen which can make us free from all the ills and evils of the man-made system. This habit of Allah is also specifically related to the consequences of going against His laws. And the Quran says, and they swore by Allah, their most binding oath, that if a warner came to them, they would be more tractable than any of the nations. Yet, when a warner came unto them, he aroused in them not save repugnance. That is, they hated it because they did not want to give up their desires and wishes and their evil path, shown in their behaving arrogantly in the land and plotting mischief, and the plotting of mischiefs engulfs but the people who make it. Do they then expect a treatment other than the one meted out to those of old? But you will not find any change in the course of Allah, nor shall you find any variation in the course of Allah. So if we look at the trend of the events and look at the Quran, then we will see that what Quran is pointing at is a fact of life, and people simply cannot avoid the consequence of their evil path. It is just a matter of patience and steadfastness on the part of the students of the Quran to wait and let the law of requital do its job in terms of decline of these nations, and at the same time build up their own strength. And nothing in the universe is out of His reach or out with His knowledge. Allah is not such that aught in the heavens or in the earth escapes Him. Lo, He is the wise, the mighty. It cannot escape Him because He is everywhere. And Allah, if someone is everywhere in the universe, then simply nothing can escape His sight and His control and authority. Philosophy of history of Hegel and Marx, unbridled intellect. What I've done over here is I've quoted from what is Islam, and it is in more detail covered in Islam, A Challenge to Religion, just to give a flair of how human beings think without the guidance of the Quran. In our times, Hegel and following after him Marx has presented history as a philosophy. But what is their philosophy of history? Hegel stated that one idea is born and grows, and this is the way human beings think. They are presented with a problem, they think of some solution, or they think of some path of life which suits those who are in power. And when it reaches maturity, decline commences in it because they are following the wrong path. So decline is inbuilt in every thought of human beings without the guidance of the Quran. And then another concept emerges counter to it. It also meets the same fate, and another concept emerges from this, which is the opposite to it. And they call it thesis and antithesis. The whole of history is a tale of these mutually conflicting concepts. And we have seen that the rise and fall of nations is, in fact, the trial and error of human experimentation with their life. Marx also said the same with this proviso that this is not a war of ideas, but of economic systems. Because Marx thought that human beings are animals, and animals need some kind of an economic system to feed themselves and to meet their physical needs. They couldn't think of a life beyond the physical self. One economic system emerges, grows, then another system emerges counter to it, which ends the first system and replaces it. And we can see that happening in today's world, and particularly in the last century, there was a tug of war going on between communism and the capitalism. After a period of time, its end is also the same. When Hegel was asked what is the power with which this continuous struggle of this regular process is being driven, he said it is Zeitgeist. He was a German, and which means the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history in which people are living and what they devise or decide to live under. That is the system they devise for themselves. And when the same question was put to Marx, he replied that the basis of it is historical necessity, which means it is the history which decides what kind of a life human beings have to live. That is, human beings are somehow forced or compulsorily forced into following a certain system. And Quran takes a totally different views. It wants human beings to be in control of their own life and its events. According to this philosophy of history, there is neither a purpose in front of the universe, nor an objective to a destination, nor any concept which is in itself virtue or evil, nor is there in any concept or system the ability to progress further and to be self-sustaining. Nor behind this great functioning universe is there any such power which is making this magnificent system operate according to some purpose. And this is surprising, though there are some scholars and philosophers who do think on those lines, and some physicists as well, that there seems to be some purpose. But since they do not have access to the Quran, or they do not wish to consult the Quran, they carry out all kinds of guesswork and speculations. There are some blind forces which are in action mechanically, and hapless man is being crushed for no rhyme or reason within these meaningless conflicts and endeavors. And this is taken from what is Islam. The Quranic philosophy of history. The philosophy of history put forward by the Quran is completely different from this. It says there is a persistent struggle continuing in the universe between Haqq and Batil. And as I said earlier, Haqq means to bring out some constructive results by following the laws of Allah. And Batil is when we go against the laws of Allah, then every outcome, even it might be attractive initially, it might give us a lot of benefits because of the wrong system. But Batil means that ultimately it ends up in destruction. And the biggest destruction is that human beings live their life and there is nothing for them in the hereafter. Haqq is absolute, established, and immutable, and its outcome is constructive and progressive. In opposition to this, Batil is like a weathercock, changing direction all the time, and its outcome is decline and destruction. In this struggle between Haqq and Batil, it is Haqq which ultimately succeeds because overcoming Batil is inherent in its nature. And why don't we see Haqq succeeding in our world? is because there is no Jamaat-e-Momineen. There is no system of deen anywhere in the world, in any land, which can stand up for the poor, which can stand up for the haqq. Nay, we hurl the truth against falsehood. Haqq smashes the skull of batil when we strike batil with haqq, and the consequence of this sustained striking is that it flees out from the arena, and it knocks out its brain, and behold, falsehood does perish. What a powerful statement of fact is of the Quran. Ah, woe be to you for the false things you ascribe. The consequence of whatever you people state against this doctrine is nothing other than destruction and ruin. And addressing those who do not accept the message of the Quran and become, as a result, become kafir, is that you think this universe is created batil. You are sadly mistaken. As and when haqq will stand up, you will see how the things start changing fairly rapidly. Next slide. The scaling and balancing of deeds requires to be studied closely. But observation of a doctrine or system of life or the state of the nation holding this ideology cannot be done in one day. And we know that for this centuries are required. This is why the Quran has stated that every single day of the laws of the universe is equivalent to thousands and thousands of years of pure calculation and reckoning. In Surah Al-Hajj it is noted, yet they ask you to hasten on the punishment, but Allah will not fail in His promise. Verily, a day in the sight of your Rabb is like 1,000 years of your reckoning. But this process of haqq speeds up if human efforts join into it. Presently, human efforts do not exist in the world. As a result, it is batil which is prevailing, and it is slowly coming to decline. The only problem is that this batil will be replaced by another kind of batil. Nations are neither made in one day, nor are they finished in one day. Their scales of life and death are different from the scales at the level of individuals, because individuals have a very narrow life. Maximum an individual is living nowadays is roughly 90 to 100 years. And out of that, most of their life is spent in struggle. So they get some useful life between roughly from 35 to about 65. Therefore, if the destructive result of a nation's wrong social system does not show up quickly, it should not be concluded from this that the consequences of their wrong actions are not even being formed. In the balance of the universe, every minuscule fragment of their deeds is being weighed. Then shall anyone who has done an atom's weight of good see it. So says the Quran. And anyone who has done an atom's weight of evil shall see it. Next slide is the process of decline is visible and recognizable. But as with the individuals, the principle of the health and disease of nations, we can call it life and death, is that while the balance of good deeds remains heavy, the nation stays alive and progresses forward. But when the balance is tilted more towards evil deeds, then the decline of the nation commences. Then he whose balance of good deeds will be found heavy will be in a life of good pleasure and satisfaction. But he whose balance of good deeds will be light will have his home in a bottomless pit. Bottomless pit because they will keep falling down and down until they disappear in the black hole. This is because good deeds continuously remove the ill effects of wrong deeds. If the balance of evil deeds keeps weighing heavier, that is tipping further down in the scales, then the nation gradually moves towards the annihilation of hell in such an unwitting way that they do not even realize that they are steadily sliding towards destruction. In the words of the Quran, by degrees shall we punish them from directions they perceive not, and because they do not want to perceive it, because they're keeping their minds and ears and eyes shut, and they think they can get away with whatever they are doing in the world. If this nation rectifies its wrong path before its destruction and its place adopts the right path of life, then it saves itself from ruin. But if it does not do this and reaches the destruction of hell, then there is no opportunity left for it to recover. But there is a ban on any population which we have destroyed, that they shall not return. And this is what the Quran emphatically states as a law. And it is destroyed in such a way that in the words of the Quran, and neither heaven nor earth shed a tear over them, nor were they given a respite. We should look at this verse few times and then think through it, that what it means not to live this life according to the permanent values. That is, we will never get another chance to come back and then mend our ways if we have spent it in an ungodly way. Next verse is the meaning of ajal, the time of respite. This is another term used in the Quran in relation to rise and fall of nations, that there is a time of respite for all laws in the physical world, that is on planet Earth. In the same way that diseases of the physical life of individuals are different, the evils of the social and economic systems of nations are also different. For every disease and the time interval to death resulting from it varies. For example, the patient suffering from tuberculosis dies after years of suffering, whereas meningitis does not grant respite for even a few days. Respite from the wrongs of the social and economic systems and the consequent annihilation due to these is also of different durations. And we can figure that out. For example, people are now mentioning World War III and a nuclear holocaust. So if there is a nuclear war between various powers, then this earth will literally become hell and will become worst. In Quranic terminology, the final limit of this time of respite is called ajal. In Surah Yunus, it is stated, to every people is a term appointed. When their term is reached, not an hour can they cause delay, nor an hour can they advance. And this ajal is directly related to the kinds of deeds people do. There is an ajal for every nation. Before that time, there is respite to mend their ways. But when the final time arrives, then there cannot be a delay of even a second. This is because, like physical diseases, there is an absolute law established for collective life and death. And all this takes place according to this law. This is the reason that where it is stated that there is an ajal for every nation or system, in another verse, this is clarified by stating that for every ajal there is an established law. The rise and fall of nations happens in according to this very law. Allah does blot out or confirms what He will as per law. With Him is the mother of the book, the basis of all laws. And Quran has all that is required to live this life free from fear and huzn. So that is the aspect we should keep in mind, that everything in this world, whatever happens through the human hands, we can figure it out in the light of the Quran. Time of respite should be used for the development of the self, and this is something for the students of the Quran. Expanding this aspect a bit further on, the Quran points to an important aspect in terms of the strengthening of the psyche of Mu'mineen in the world. It tells Mu'mineen that since they have entered into a covenant with Allah, it's very important we should go through this verse few times and see what it means to become a Mu'min and a Muslim. And this covenant is based on the acceptance of Iman by them, in which the life of the hereafter is an intrinsic part. Hence, they need not be impatient on this path of theirs. And this is the beauty of the Quran, that it puts the fact of the life of the hereafter before us very clearly and very succinctly, so that we make it part of our consciousness as well as subconsciousness, because that is where our life depends. And the system of deen will be predicated on this very value, where hereafter every member of the society will keep in mind that the life does not end with death. Iman in the reality of the existence of the hereafter means that time is now on their side. However, it does not mean slowing down their efforts. It means to continue their efforts with full focus and vigor, all the while keeping in mind that their efforts will never go to waste, because the permanent value is wasbir fa inna Allaha la yudiyu ajra al-muhsinin. Have patience, because you know that results are going to manifest themselves, whatever we are doing now. And Allah does not allow the deeds of muhsinin, those who do righteousness in the world, go to waste. It simply cannot, because if we follow this path, we will know ourselves that our deeds are not going to waste. Just as in our physical life, where if we have a balanced diet together with regular exercise, we will enjoy a healthy life. This applies similarly to the life of ourself. If we subject it to those laws which deal with the development of the self, then this will be manifested in its development with tangible signs which can be checked using the Quranic criterion for a developed self. One sign given here is the confidence with which Mu'mineen can tell the opponents, you follow your path and we will follow ours. Let time prove who ultimately succeeds and who ends up in ruin. So the time of respite which people get as a result of the rise and fall of nations, that should be utilized by Mu'mineen to rise up, to build up their strength, and to come together and then work for the system of Deen, and then see how the results materialize in the outer world. Next slide is death and life based on laws. From the above discussion, this fact becomes evident that according to the Quran, the life and death of nations does not occur purely as a result of chance or mere accident, nor is it due to mere deception of some blind force of nature either. All this occurs through procedures and laws. The Quran states that Allah might accomplish a matter already enacted as a result of deeds, that those who perished would perish upon a clear sign which had been given, and those who lived might live after a clear sign had been given. So that one who is killed due to a reason, and the one who lives due to a reason also. And we should keep it in mind, this is for Mu'mineen. What Quran is stating over here is not for those who go against the Quran. This is meant for Muttaqeen and Mu'mineen who are becoming and coming to the path of, that is, they are coming to the straight path and then following laws of Allah with a view to establish the system of Deen. Here life is not received as a charity, nor does death and destruction occur through deceit. This is because it was not Allah who wronged them, it was they who wronged themselves. Allah does not do wrong to any nation, it is the nation that does wrong to itself and as a result is destroyed. Analyzing choice plus intent. Thoughts to find solutions do cross the minds of many people who suffer at the hands of other human beings, i.e., due to the wrong systems in the world. And we see people mentioning that what is the solution? And if there is God, where is He and why He doesn't do something for the poor? And these kind of statements find answer in the Quran because Allah acts through human hands. And the whole Quran is addressing Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen to rise up and then establish the system and then stand up for the poor. However, when some among them come into a position of being able to change the system or are invited to the Quran, most wish to conform with the former system which has benefited them. And that is a very important point. There is no point in crying for the poor and those who are being slaughtered in various parts of the world like Gaza and elsewhere, and then not doing anything, which means not coming to the Quran. Because being the beneficiary of the system, they do not want the existing system, which is giving them benefits, to change, but somehow the system which is slaughtering others should change. And Quran says it cannot change, it cannot happen, because the evil mentalities which are not guided by the Quran are going to create fasad and bloodshed in the world. The issue for us to analyze is that if choice and intent is not given to man, then the creation of Allah becomes meaningless, and the Quran states that Allah does not create anything without haqq. Why do we need to understand the reason for the creation of human beings in the world? Firstly, not knowing this means that if a reason for this exists and we are not interested in it, then we are not using that cognitive side which needs to have this answer in order to manifest its potential. The Quran has summed it up succinctly by saying, Inna hadainahu sabila imma shakiram wa imma kafura. And we know the meaning of shukr is to bring out our best. Those abilities which are given to us, we should manifest them in the outer world for the good of others. And kafura means that we hide our own abilities, we hide whatever we possess from others, and we reject the message of Allah. Guidance is provided, now it is his choice to select a path in life. And there are many verses in the Quran like that. Secondly, there is a precise logic behind human creation in which Allah has provided human beings with a cognitive mechanism which has the potential to create new life within us through the use of our intellect and reasoning in study of the Quranic value system. It is at the level of our intellect and reasoning that we question the issues of our existence, problems in the world, etc., and then try to find solutions. It is we, that is human beings, worry about these things, stress ourselves when problems are created in the world. In the animal kingdom, they don't care if somebody is being bombed or not, or somebody is being slaughtered unjustly in some land. Next slide is need for a new life which can create a new world. What do we mean by new life? If we look at the process which we use to make decisions in our daily life using our eye, we can see that the world we have collectively created around us is the product of this thinking process. Hence, all the problems, developments, inventions, technical progress, etc., are owed to the decision making of this eye. This eye is experiencing its life through the physical body which it inhabits. And this life is dependent on the way it is making these decisions and then acting on these in the outer world. Why did I put these slides together in this way? Because on one side, the rise and fall of nations is taking place. There are systems which are going down in one part of the world, and in another part of the world, the economic systems are rising. And if we want to take advantage of the Quran, we have to understand our own psyche, because once we convince ourselves and understand the procedure of the Quran, then we will become convinced that by following the path of the Quran, we can replace the man-made systems in some part of the world. If this eye becomes dissatisfied with the world it creates, and this is an extremely important point, we have to be dissatisfied with the man-made world while earning our living within the man-made system, because this is an intellectual exercise. This is an intellectual outlook which we have to change. It is, i.e., it is unhappy with its present life, then it needs to start thinking differently within the confines of the system of Deen. It is this change and understanding which will lead to a different cognitive path of life, and once it treads on it using the Quran, then it will acquire a new life through its own efforts, because now it has decided to go on a different path. And the moment we start going on a different path, we acquire a different self to follow that path, because each path has its own value system. If we do not acknowledge our cognitive side, which makes us aware of the existence of a self, we will always exist at an animalistic level. If we look around, the criteria for success in a non-Deen world are always predicated on material successes. And I'm not saying that. This is given in the Quran repeatedly, that those who reject the message of the Quran, they are worse than animals. Why they are worse than animals? Because animals follow instinct, and these human beings, what they become is that they create bloodshed and create destruction in the world, which animals don't do. It is human beings who are unbridled and do not wish to follow the path of the Quran and think that the life will end with death. Then they resort to all kind of destruction in the world. If our self is based on a material outlook, then where is the life in it? It is contented with the material world and its attractions, while the need for a self or the hereafter does not even cross such minds. The world of 2024 is under the control of this unbridled intellect, which is managing world affairs on this assumption that human life ends with death. Where is the life in it? Next slide is the solution lies in bringing our psyche in line with the Quranic guidance. Fourthly, despite being a tiny speck as compared to the size of the universe, in order for man to fully appreciate the true purpose for the existence of his cognitive potentials, he needs to know the operating domain of his thoughts. And there is no limit to human thoughts. We can think of galaxies beyond even the visible galaxies and imagine a world which is extending beyond this universe. These can encompass the so far known universe and have the capacity to keep on expanding the field of view. What is the limit of the grasp of our thought? And then what is the speed of it? Our thoughts have a tremendous speed. We can think of anything, anytime. Scientists also ponder like this without the light of the Quran, but they cannot relate this to the potential of the human self for an eternal life. It is by understanding Allah's creation and its purpose from the Quran that we human beings can give meaning to the universe, its relation to our existence here, and then the connection of the developed self to the life of the hereafter. Fifthly, Allah is drawing our attention to the importance of providing choice and intent and then making available His wahi for guidance, that this new form of creation of a new life is placed within the reach of each one of us. The fact is that we are here and our death is staring us in the face. Thus, if we desire guidance, having become dissatisfied with the man-made systems, not out of fear of death, then we need to develop those latent potentials of ours which are kept within us. And Quran points to all those latent potentials and much more, to which the Quran draws our attention, i.e. the divine attributes, to manifest these in the human world. And next slide is removing our own dissonances. Sixthly, our attention is drawn to this point that this unity among people is possible if we strive for this in the world. The formula is called Rububiyat as a system. Understand, acquire this attribute of Rabb, and then start to work together with this aim in mind. As a precondition, create a self which has its differences removed with those who also share the same goal in their life. And we have covered this aspect that when we acquire Iman the way Quran has explained to us, then our differences start to disappear. The issue for us is that we cannot explain this until we make ourselves free from our own inner dissonances. Once differences become removed, then the self thus developed and it becomes unchained. And we feel it. We come to this conclusion that now I feel unchained. I've got rid of all those unwanted belief systems which we might have inherited or we might have picked up unwittingly. Will understand the newly acquired psyche and can explain to others its outlook, vision, functioning under the Quranic value system, and above all, the pleasure of acquiring a dissonance-free self. And a dissonance-free self is a truly free self on the planet Earth. We have discussed some important aspects of a developed self in previous presentations, for example, patience, steadfastness, inner unity of purpose, understanding of the Quranic value system, uncompromising resolve, that is firmly saying, I'm going to follow this path, come what may. If there is one human being following this path, let it be me. Complete trust in the laws of Allah, ability to refer back to the Quran on every crossroad of life, hearts united with other mu'mineen, and that is very important sign when people come together in pursuit of the system of deen, then their hearts become united because now they have one purpose, and that purpose is eternal life and to relieve mankind from the fear and huzn which exists due to man-made system. All these need to become an intrinsic part of our psyche. Next is accounts from the past help transform our present, which impacts our future. Here the Quran comes to the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen to reassure them that the whole aim of its guidance is to help them to progress towards the establishment of the system of deen. There is a lot of repetition in this presentation as well as in our previous presentation. The reason is that human mind forgets things very quickly. And the more we go through some of these things and reiterate to our own subconscious, then it becomes part of us. And then we are less likely to make mistakes. Firstly, look at the accounts of the previous Anbiya who went through similar challenges and hardships. This should provide hope and the expectation of that things will ultimately go in favor of the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen. And if we start getting bored and fed up with these repetitions, and there are a lot of repetitions in the Quran, because that is the way human mind works. If human beings forget very quickly, then we have to remind each other. And we have to remind our children as well when they are going through their education, training, and self-development. And if we get bored with this kind of repetition, that means we are not yet ready for the system of deen. Secondly, here deduction and training is being extended to them through the messenger in terms of helping them to transform their psyche, which strengthens their resolve on this path of theirs. If historical accounts provide evidence that Mu'mineen were helped in the past, then the immutable law of Allah is still applicable as He is Al-Hayyul Qayyum. Just imagine the strength of the words used, for example, Nusabbitu bihi adaka, though addressed directly to the messenger, but applicable for all times, because this is how our hearts become strengthened. When we see everyone on this path and then we share it, all the values, permanent values, and keep treading on this, the results start appearing right before our eyes in this world. Taking advantage of the law of the rise and fall of nations through the law of requital. When we make an effort in life, we look for quick outcomes. That is, ideally, this urge is kept within us. If we do not have any hope of getting any results in our life, then we are unlikely to pursue that path. However, it is possible in the world of religion that people engage in rituals without expecting results in this life. And people do things in the world without expecting rewards in this life. Why do they do it? Because they have some kind of a faith or a blind belief in those kind of practices. The Quran points to this urge of ours and provides us with the solution, i.e., to get results in one finite life of ours on this planet. The Quran tells the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen to announce convincingly that the path pursued by them will bear results once their efforts and deeds have reached the point for their manifestation as per the law of requital. Hence, they are not in a hurry to get quick results. They also tell their opponents who do not have Iman in the way of Allah that their path will also produce adverse consequences as their conduct is against the laws of Allah. Just wait a little longer. Next point is, why did the Quran feel the need to point to this fact? The reason is that Batil is well established and possesses power, and Batil at this point in time controls human affairs in the physical domain. And if we go through the Quran, we will see that the tone of the Quran changes when it talks to Mu'mineen and when it talks to those who are not Mu'mineen, that is the other categories. And Quran motivates us that you are not alone. The one who has created the universe is going to be with you if you follow his laws. This is visible to the Mu'mineen as well, who are apparently weak in the physical domain and do not possess any physical power to bring about any tangible change. However, their path in the initial phases of striving for deen is related more to the development of their self. Next slide is studying the rise and fall of nations leads to a change in psyche. The rich and powerful had gained control of these nations and had decided to transgress the laws of Allah. This transgression led to the creation of imbalances in society. Why do the rich and powerful gain control in any society? This happens when no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen exists in it who can act on the permanent value of promote good and forbid evil. As and when the messengers of Allah arrived in their society, it used to be in a deplorable state morally, and imbalances existed in every aspect of the society due to the man-made laws. And we find the world exactly in the same state, that despite technology and advancement and conveniences of life, the basic human being remains the same, and a lot of slaughter and killing is taking place in the world. And there's a gross amount of poverty in various parts of the world. Those in power did not wish to reform as it went against their vested interests, but Batil cannot continue indefinitely in the human world. Such situations then invite human intervention as per the laws of Allah. And I have quoted part of this verse from Surah Nur. وَلَا يُمَكِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ دِينَهُمُ الَّذِي أَرْتَضَىٰ لَهُمْ وَلَا يُبَدِّلَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِمْ أَمْنًا. That once this deen is established in the land, then what happens is that the fear in which they were living will turn into peace. Lord, the purpose of deen is to remove fear and replace it with peace. We can look into the verse in the Quran. Messengers were human beings just like us, and the issues they faced are the same as those we see in today's world. Technology does not change basic human values at a fundamental level. So we should not deceive ourselves with the technology around us and being overwhelmed with that. This technology we will leave behind when we die, and we die as human beings. We came alone to this world, and we will leave alone from this world. The issue is that what did we do with our life in between our birth and death? And once the message has come to us, And if we are still complaining about the man-made system, then it's a great opportunity to grasp the book of Allah with both hands. We can easily see wrongs taking place through human hands in today's world. Science and technology is not helping to eliminate, for example, poverty from the world. The issue is what kind of intellect can help to eliminate these evils, and am I willing to change my intellect and turn it into new life? What is in it for us in 2024? There is one difference here. These messengers received the wahi of Allah themselves directly, and then they followed its instructions after having iman in it, while in our case, we have received the complete Quran containing the wahi of Allah, and we now have to feel the need for it, then accept iman, understand it together with others, and then start to follow its instructions. Fairly straightforward. Therefore, fundamentally, Allah's wahi remains the same, and His laws are just as applicable today as they were then. So we have to create a motivation. We have to reject the man-made word and say, I do not accept it, because this is unacceptable to me, it is unacceptable to my family, and it should be unacceptable to the humanity as well. But what can I do? Get on the path individually and join those who are already on this path. Allah is still present to ensure His laws do not fail in their efficacy, and the law of requital does favor the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen as it always did. It favors those who willingly hold their selves accountable. Since wahi goes against the desires of those who are in power, hence they oppose any efforts to establish the system of deen. But those who are following this path, they are not alone. The cosmic forces will be supporting them, and Allah is on their side, and He is present everywhere. This opposition helps to strengthen the iman of those who wish to continue following the path of Allah. Those who are not fully convinced leave and go elsewhere, which is fine. It's not a number game. It's not a question of how many people have converted themselves into mu'mineen. It is those who have converted themselves into mu'mineen voluntarily. How are they going to educate, train, and develop themselves? Only those remain on this path together who have understood the guidance and the importance of remaining steadfast on this path. This leads to the formation of a Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, and if these people stay united together and keep on strengthening their conviction, gradually their understanding of the system of deen improves. And continuing the word of 2024, while man has made amazing progress in the development of technology and the production of the means of sustenance across the world, the issue of the use of this technology and the distribution of these means of sustenance for the good of the whole of mankind remains elusive. Discoveries in the field of science are remarkable and have changed the face of planet Earth. However, the question which appears before a student of the Quran under the permanent value, what is good for mankind remains on earth. The issue is how to replace the man-made systems to facilitate this permanent value. And there are many other permanent values like that. That is how to replace this system with what is good for mankind. And obviously, somebody has to rise up and do their job. The Quran itself guides us in this regard. We have seen that the rise and fall of nations is not something which we cannot understand. It is very straightforward and is based on evidence. The functioning of the law of requital tells us to look for the causes and effects of all decision-making under the man-made systems at any point in time in the world, and then compare these with the permanent values and assess which values are being transgressed and to what degree. More on this. As more and more values keep being transgressed, the decline of that man-made system comes nearer and nearer. For example, in today's world, some of the signs include the concentration of money in the hands of a few at the top and the flow of capital towards the rich corporations on a continuous basis. The power structure favors the rich and powerful. Economic enslavement is stifling the ordinary citizen. Fear is deliberately and continually created. We have to be aware of it all the time. Exploitation of natural resources and their inequitable distribution. Wars are planned and triggered at will. For example, starting from World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, wars in the Middle East, for example, in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Ukraine. Regime changes have become the norm. Now the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the extremes of cruelty and tyranny unleashed on helpless human beings. And I hope this presentation will help to come to this conclusion that the only alternative is to come to the Quran and then come together and rise as Jamaat-e-Momineen. All this presents an abysmal picture of planet Earth, and as students of the Quran, one can question Allah, is this human life meant to be like this? The word of 2024, what is the verdict of the Quran? The answer from the direction of Allah comes as a big and definite no, that it is not meant to be like this. If you wish to change the man-made word into the word of Deen, then follow the guidance of the Quran and follow it after acquiring firm conviction, that is Iman in its value system. And then whatever happens in the word, never be distracted by it, because now you have changed your track onto a different one, which is called Sirat al-Mustaqim. We have seen under Surah Al-Fatiha that conceptually Allah Himself has laid down the framework to bring a change in the human psyche when it teaches us this supplication, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, Sirat al-Lazina an'amta alayhim. Show us the straight path, the path of those who became successful, that is, they became eligible for the bounties of Allah. And what could be those bounties? That is, becoming free from all kinds of fear and huzn in the world, and not only get this life turned into paradise, but have the life of the hereafter turned into Al-Jannah. Then the Quran stated to us the formula for acquiring power in the land, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَا يَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. A firm commitment if the recipe is followed as directed, that Allah has promised to those who have Iman, that precise Iman which is noted in the Quran, and then they develop their self to that self which can establish the system of Deen through Salih deeds, and they will be established in the earth because this is a permanent value. Then told us concisely, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not lose heart, do not fall into despair, because Mu'mineen never fall into despair. And if they fall into despair, then they are meant to overcome it by studying the Quran, by coming together and discussing with others. You will get in control if you stay Mu'mineen. Finally, the word of 2024, what is the verdict of the Quran? The central point in all this discussion is the fact that this word, despite being in the control of those who are following non-Allah laws and have made the life of everyone hell, including their own life as well, they do not have any hereafter, is within the grip of the laws of Allah. What can be the hell in this word when you think that the life will end with death, whereas the fact is it is not going to end with death, and people die with all kinds of regrets, disappointments, and uncertainty. And while they themselves are mortals, they are trying to kill others. And this thing does not add up. These are all disintegrated psyches these guys possess. Comprehending this fact and being able to attain a firm mental grasp of these holds the key to approaching the Quran correctly, i.e., Allah still remains just as much in control of His universe, and the earth is very much a part of this. Next is, He has stated very clearly and forcefully, وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَٰهٌ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَٰهٌ, that He is Allah in the outer world and He is also Allah in the earth. And the only thing is that you recognize Him as Allah, accept His rule, follow His values, and then see whether He helps you or not. He is Allah in the heavens and Allah in the earth. Coming to grips with this reality holds the key to success in acquiring power in the land. This includes not being distracted by whatever is going on in the world of 2024 and remaining steadfast on the path of Allah. But that does not mean that we should not find out what is going on in the world. We should find out every aspect possible about the present world, and we got all this social media on our fingertips, on our phones, and at the same time not becoming distorted, but comparing it with what Allah has put forward before us, and to gain strength that Sirat al-Mustaqim is the right path for us. This is where firm conviction in the book of Allah becomes a source of patience and resolve, and one can say, La tahzan inna Allaha ma'ana, And remember, these were the words used by the Messenger of Allah with his companion in the cave when the kafirin and mushrikeen were looking for him in order to murder him, and he got protected. This protection is inbuilt within this message, and that is how we should look at it. This permanent value is still alive and available as it is from that Allah who is Al-Hayyul Qayyum, and he is present everywhere. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen.